All right, CNT120, we're looking at the second part of our Chapter 1 lab. The first part we did our peer-to-peer network. Now we're going to build a small Linux virtual machine for use for the semester. So on this, here on our lab sheet here, I'm going to scroll down to where that part begins, right here. This is part 2, build our Linux virtual machine. Real quickly, many things we do in IT are either Windows or Linux. So the purpose of building our Linux VM is we're going to start getting our feet wet with Linux, but it's also going to give us a chance to work with a virtual machine, which again for some of you is something new as well. So the first thing we would need to do is actually download and install a hypervisor. In this case, we're using VMware. Now, our lab machines here have that already installed. Actually, let me do this real here. On our desktop is our VMware Workstation player. That's our hypervisor. There is other hypervisors out there, VirtualBox, Hyper-V, those sorts of things. There is other ones out there, but we're using VMware. That is kind of the predominant virtualization system that's being used right now. So we're sticking with the mainstream. So that's already been done for you, but I have a link here in case you would need to do that on your own. The next thing we would need to do is download an ISO or Linux image, if you will, that we could use in our hypervisor. Again, I have a link to Linux Mint out here. You could download it from there. Our lab machines already have that downloaded. If I go to my if I just go to the C drive here, in this C drive there's a folder called CNT Apps. In there we have Linux Mint 18, a little bit old, but that's the version we're going to use. It's already installed on our student image, so that is the ISO we'll be using for our virtual machine. So those two first steps have been done for our lab machines here. So the next thing we need to do is we'll launch our VMware Workstation. That's where I'm going to pick up from in case you want to follow along. So I'm going to minimize that. I'm going to minimize this for now. So here's my hypervisor. I've launched that. I'm going to click the option for create a new virtual machine. It says here, how do I want to deal with this? We need to select the option for installer disk image. That's the ISO, and we will need to find that. So we're going to go to the C drive. I'm going to go to the CNT apps, and in here I will select the Linux Mint ISO that we have, and we'll say open. So it's going to use that image for us. We'll then say next from here. In here we'll tell it what it is. This is a Linux operating system, and it is a 3x kernel 64-bit, so we can actually use that. There's other ones in here as you see. It's recognized that that's what it is, so we'll use that. I'm going to click next. It's going to ask us what do we want to call this virtual machine. Now, this would be the name that's going to show up here for you to see. So I'm going to create something on mine like Brown. Let's do something like Brown CNT120 Mint or something like that. That way I know when I sit down at this is the virtual machine. Actually, I'll do like Linux Mint. Brown CNT120 Linux Mint. That way I know this is my virtual machine and not somebody from another night class, if you will. I'll click next. It's then going to say what kind of disk size do I want. I want to give it a little bit more than 8 gig. I'm going to at least go up to 12 so I have a little bit of room to put things in here. It then says specify, do I want to do a split or store? We're going to do store. The split makes it easier to move the virtual machine the other way, but the store makes it a little bit easier to work with on a day-to-day. So we'll say next. Here I could accept this, but I want to customize my hardware real quick. I want to go in here and I want to increase my memory a little bit. It's giving me kind of like the minimum. I want to go up and at least give it a gig of memory, at least a gig. 2 would be a little bit better, but I don't want to steal too much from my operating system. So maybe a gig. Maybe if I slide it up to 2 gig, that'll help a little bit for processing on that. But I want to increase a little bit more than the minimum. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here where my network adapters are. You'll notice it's set for NAT right now. We want this to be bridged. Bridge is going to make this act like it's its own little NIC onto the network. NAT means this Windows 10 machine is going to hand it an IP address. We don't want that. We want this to be bridged like it's its own little machine on the network. So I will say OK to that guy. Those are the two main options we need to do. So we'll say close. Now we'll say finish. Now the virtual machine is actually created. What I'm going to do is launch this thing and do the install of this. So I'll either double click on this or click play, and it's going to start the install process. So I might pause here in a little bit, and actually I will do remind me later. I'm not going to worry about installing the extra options at this point. I might at some point here pause it while it's doing some of the install functions. You don't have to sit here and watch all of it, but I'll let it run for right now, and if it's going quickly, I'll let it run. If it seems like it's taking a while, I will pause and come back when it's done with a function. Alright, so it's booted the ISO image at this point. It's not actually installed, so I'm going to, once it comes up here, I will do the install Linux Mint, and this is actually going to, I'll double click on that guy, this is actually going to install this into the virtual machine so it's there for every time I use it. I'm just going to follow the on-screen prompts here to do the install. So I'll do English. I'm not going to worry about any third party at this point. I'm going to, this looks a little weird, but I'm going to erase this little piece of the hard drive that I'm putting this on. That's okay. That's all right. I'll say install now. Sure. I'll select my time zone. I'm in New York, Eastern time zone. That's good. English for my keyboard. Sounds good. Now, for when it comes to the username, your name, why don't you put in for your name, you know, a simple first name, last name kind of thing. It'll say Doug Brown Virtual Machine. That's good. For username, you can use that. For password, let's all be very generic and do something like CNT class, like we do for our lab machines. I know it's going to come up as a weak password, but that way we don't have to worry about remembering what password we've used in here. So we'll use, in our lab, we'll use something like CNT class, very generic. And I can require the password to log in, or I can do login automatically. It's really up to you. Sometimes this is just handy when you first boot it logs in for you. I'll say continue. And it's going to do the install process. So I'm going to just let this run. I'm going to pause our podcast while it's doing the install. I'll come back when I get to a point of when we need to do something specific. Okay, it took a couple minutes. I let it finish installing. It did get to a spot where it said, restart now. So I did the restart now. It has restarted. I have not done anything other than that. I just let it restart and boot back up here. Here's my screen as it is. It does a little welcome screen of, kind of like introducing you to things on Linux Mint. Okay, I'm going to say I don't want to see that anymore. I'm fine without that. Here is my virtual machine. This is actually my Linux virtual machine running inside my Windows 10 machine using my VMware. So I'm now going to use this machine. Well, one or two things I might want to do right off the bat that helps with working with this. I'm going to go here and right click on the desktop, and I'm going to go to my options where I can do my desktop settings, and I'll go back a level here, and I'm going to go to where it says display. Where is my display? Where is my display? I'm looking for you. Where are you? Here we go. There's my display. And I'm going to give this a little bit more screen resolution. Maybe a 1024 by 768, or maybe a 1280 by 768, and apply that. That's going to allow this virtual machine to be a little bit larger to work with. That makes my screen area a little bit better to work with. So that's one of the first things I'll do. Next thing, if I take a look around, down here is my menu. This is kind of like my start button on my old Windows machine. This has in all the main areas that I would need to encounter: accessories, graphics, internet. There's my browser, office software, admin. This is where I make changes to my machine and so forth. Okay. Bottom bar, I also have this is showing the desktop. I can clear it if I, clear all the junk off my desktop and show it. Here's my browser. There's my Firefox. Here's my command prompt. And then here is my file browser, if you will. Okay. So there's a couple quick things to get around. Bottom right corner, here's my network connection. I can open that up. There's my network connection that I would need. Okay, so there's a couple things to get me around. One of the first things I want to do is I want to verify what IP address this machine has. So I'm actually going to open my command prompt. I'll open the command prompt here, and my command in here is ifconfig, and this will show me the IP address my machine has, 172.23.165.13. Okay, so yay, I have that up, and I know the IP address of this machine. Well, let's be sneaky. Let's open the command prompt on my Windows machine. Here's my Windows machine. Let's do ipconfig over here. What is this IP address? Here he is here, 172.21.64.139. Well, let's do a little ping between them and see what happens. So we're going to try here. Let's try on this guy here first. On my Windows machine, let's ping 172.23.165.13. Oops. If I can type. There we go. There's a ping between my Windows machine and my Linux machine. Yay! And I should be able to do the other way around. I forget what the Windows machine IP is. So let me scroll up here. I should be able to ping 172.23.164.139. There we go. Now I have a ping from my Linux back to my Windows. I'll need Control-C on the Linux to stop my ping. So there is my kind of my initial setup. Actually installing my virtual machine, and now I've gone in with my command prompt, check my IP, done a ping, check my IP over here, done a ping. So I know these two machines are talking like they're their own nodes on the network. The other thing I need to do while I'm here on my virtual machine is I need to install one or two things to have the functionality I need later. So on this guy, I'm going to run two commands. I need to run a command called sudo apt install Traceroute. What we're doing is we're saying we need super user privileges, so super user do. An application that I need, please install this thing called Traceroute. Now it's going to prompt me for my password. This should be the CNT class password I did previously, or I set previously. It's going to go out, find that package, download it, install it for me. So now I should be able to run a Traceroute to something like google.com. And that should run for me. I'm not going to let that finish. Just so you can see that that works. The other thing I want to install is my Traceroute. So I'm going to hit the up arrow, sudo apt install mtr. That's something we'll need for a later lab as well. Capital Y to continue. There we go. So now I should be able to run mtr www.google.com. And that'll run my Traceroute to google.com. Again, we need that in the future lab. So I don't need that now, just making sure the functionality is there. So those are the two last things I need to do while I have my virtual machine up. Now, the only thing left is to gather proof of my virtual machine working. And what I can do, in my Windows side over here, I'm going to close this command prompt. I'll open up my Word file again. I'll create a new Word file. I can either create a new Word file or open the one I had started previously for the peer-to-peer lab. It doesn't matter. I'm going to take a screenshot of this guy showing this machine working. So I'll do ifconfig over here, so I can show my IP address and this thing's up and running. And I'm going to do again. I will click on this right here and do an Alt function print screen. Come over into my Word document and do a paste. And there shows my virtual machine up and running. And again, I could add this to my previous Word document or create a new one. It does not matter. But that shows my virtual machine up and running. Alright, I would save this and submit this to D2L. I'm just going to close that for now. I don't need it for right now. The only other thing I need to do is in my virtual machine, I will close this down. I do need to shut this down like any other machine. I'll say shut down and let this, kind of log out, if you will, or shut down and log out. And now, if I go back and open my VMware here, I'll see that my virtual machine is there and ready to go. There's my Brown 120 Linux Mint. Yay! And we're going to be using that most weeks in lab in here, so that'll be handy and ready to roll. So there is my Linux Mint virtual machine part of Chapter 1 Lab.